What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the next part in the Spotify series. In the last two videos, we spent some time writing out some API calls for the browse functionality. And in this part, we're going to start actually putting together the user interface for that tab. So if that all sounds good, make sure you start by destroying the like button down below. Open up Xcode, and let's dig back into our project. So let me just go ahead and give this a run in our simulator. So A, we get our simulator, and B, everything is still compiling. And then we will jump into the home view controller. So here it is. So if you guys recall, we basically wrote out a bunch of API calls, and it's going to yield us three pieces of information. So let me go ahead and we can leave this here, but let's just write out when we say fetch data, what are we getting? So we're going to be getting featured playlists. Okay, that makes sense. We're also going to be getting recommended tracks. And what was that third one? I think we were also going to be getting, let me go back and take a peek at our API caller since we wrote a ton of code in here. We are also going to be getting new releases. That was the other one. So we're going to get albums in new releases. So we're also going to be getting new releases. So if we think about the user interface and how we want this to be modeled and how Spotify does it, there's two approaches we can take. One approach is a table view with a bunch of nested views, presumably collection views. It's a little messy. It's kind of the old way to do things. Now, Apple introduced a new collection view layout called a compositional layout, which lets us create pretty complex UIs. And it's actually what the App Store uses and a bunch of other apps. So that's what we will be using to build out this screen. So housekeeping, right? So fetching data, we want to fetch all this data in aggregate before we actually update our UI, because then it would just kind of be weird. Each of these pieces of data should have a respective section. So let's go ahead and set up our collection view, and then we'll hook up all of our data calls and whatnot. So let's do it. So what we want up here first is a collection view declaration. Now we're not going to actually assign it up here, and we'll see why in a moment. Now in view did load, what we want to do is let's configure the collection view here. So I'm going to say let collection view is going to be a UI collection view, and we want to give it a frame of 0 to start, and we want to give it a layout as well. So we're going to create a layout right above this. I'm going to go ahead and say let's layout is going to be a UI collection view compositional layout, not the section provider business. Layout, just like that. Open up the constructor, and there's quite a few to choose from in here. The one that I like to go with is just the one with the section provider. Now just go ahead and hit enter. It'll give you the autocomplete, but this itself is a closure that takes in the section index. And then the second thing here is an environment to get things like, are we on an iPad, so on and so forth. And we're going to ignore that. And what this wants us to do is basically return a layout to the compositional layout of how that section should look. It's a little confusing, so bear with me here. What we are going to do now is create another function, and this function will be responsible for creating our actual layout. So we're going to say func, and this is going to be create section layout. Let's go ahead and spell that right, section layout. It's going to take in the index, and this is how we can allow different sections to have different looks and feels. And this is going to return an NS collection layout section. So if you're not familiar with this, I've actually got a separate video on this as well if you want to take a look at it, or you can feel free to follow along, whatever floats your boat. So here we are going to say, we're just going to call that function. So we're going to say create section layout for the given section index. And we can go ahead and just return this like that. You can actually just take this whole thing, just plug it into the second parameter here for a layout. Let's go ahead and line break everything so it's a little cleaner to read. And actually, let's see if we can get away with moving this declaration out above instead of having our collection view be optional. I usually like to do it optional and then just assign it. But let's see if we can get away with this. So it's going to yell about using self. Cannot use instance member of self before it's available because it's not allocated yet. So what we could do is make it a capital S for self. And you could make this a static function. That way you can just keep everything non-optional. So just like that. So now in here, what we want to do is we want to create one of these section layout things. And we're going to change it based on different section index. So let me actually rename this parameter to be section, just like that. And let's change the call site here to be section as well. But let's just create one layout so you guys can get a feel for what the heck a layout actually even is. So a layout is a concept where you create an item, you put an item into a group, the item goes into a section, and then you return it. So the section is pretty simple. It's this thing right here, right? A NS layout section. So let me go ahead and create that. We'll say a section is basically this, and we can go ahead and create it with a parenthesis. And this takes in a group. So we're going to create a group just like that. Now we're going to create the group right above. So this is going to be a NS layout group, something along those lines. NS collection layout group is what I'm looking for. All right, hold on, let's try that again. NS layout collection. I said it wrong. So NS collection layout group. Because naming conventions get so long that after a while, it's all just like one big haze. So you can create this as a horizontal group or a vertical group. And this is where the power of groups kind of come into play of if you want this section to scroll horizontally or vertically, you can have it do that. So let's just go with vertical for a second. And this can take in a layout size, and then it can also take in what type of sub item does this group need to have and how many of them. So we're going to say it's going to have one item. The sub item is going to be nothing more than an item. And layout size is a little tricky, so let's do that right now. So item, we haven't created yet, of course, but this layout size is a NS collection layout size. And what this is basically asking us to say is how big is this group? But it's not going to take in, just like numbers in terms of constants of the size. What it takes in is the type that the width and height should be. And there are three types, if memory serves: estimated, absolute, and fractional. So you can say take up, 100% of the width, right? So here we're saying we have a vertical group. So I'm going to say fractional width, and this is going to take up 1.0, and we are going to give it a, let's say, an absolute height, which will be a constant of, let's say, 120. And that is our group. And now we just need to create the item up here. Now that I think about it, I probably did it backwards. I probably should have created the item first. But now we're going to create a layout item, which basically just represents one of our cells. And this takes in a layout size. So we are going to create a layout size here again. So I'm just going to actually copy and paste this. And the layout size of the item is relational to the group itself. So it's a little confusing to think about in the beginning, but once you do it a few times, you will definitely get the hang of it. Just be careful with all your parentheses and line breaks and all that good stuff. So we're gonna leave that there for a moment. This will actually be fractional height. We're gonna say 1.0 for this as well. Let me go ahead and line break all this stuff. And I want to actually run this before we go ahead and add a bunch of other sections and other stuff in here, just so you guys can visualize what the heck is going on. So we're returning the section in this function that makes this layout thing happy up here. We now need to actually configure our collection view. So I'm going to say configure collection view, just like that. So what is configure collection view going to do? We're basically going to set up the delegates and data source and all that stuff. So we actually first want to say add subview for the collection view. We also want to, register a cell for it. Of course, we're going to need custom cells later on, but since we're still working on the layout at the moment, I'm just going to go with a vanilla collection view cell with an identifier of cell. We want to go ahead and tell this guy its data source is self. And we're also going to say the delegate is self. And I believe that's what we need to do for the collection view. Let me also set a background color to it, since I think it's nil by default. We'll say it is system background. We want to go ahead and conform to the collection view protocol. So I'm going to do it in an extension down here, since this controller might get fairly large fairly quickly. So we are going to say this conforms to UI collection view delegate and UI collection view data source. Now, the data source requires two functions for number of items and cell for item. So I'll hit the error and hit fix. I'm just going to return an arbitrary number here. Let's say 20. And let's go ahead and create a cell. So we're going to dequeue this. So we're going to say collection view, dequeue a reusable cell with an identifier of cell, since that's what we registered. We're going to go ahead and return said cell. And just so we can visualize it, what we will do here is we are going to say cell dot background color is going to be a system green. And let's see, I don't think we ever gave this a frame. So we are going to override view did layout subviews. And in here, we are going to say the collection views frame is view.bounds. Now, we're eventually going to need a spinner as well, a UI activity indicator while the data loads. So let's just go ahead and add it up here since we're going to need it regardless. So let's create a private let spinner, which is going to be a UI activity indicator view, just like that. This is an anonymous closure, this pattern of creating your elements in these like block looking things. I've got a video on this, a pretty common place in a lot of code bases. So if you're not familiar, definitely take a look at that. We'll say tint color here is label. And let's see, spinner dot hides when stopped will also be true. Looking good. And I guess we're going to need to add this as a subview also. Might as well just do it now. We'll say add spinner, and let's just leave it as such for now. And let's go ahead and give this a run. Let's make sure it's compiling. So looks like we have an error already. What a surprise. So let's see what's going on. So we are getting a error here. So self, since it's a stored property, what it's basically yelling at you about is even capital S for self isn't valid. So you need to just reference the class directly. So we can just put home view controller there. So it'll stop yelling at you. But if we run this, you'll see that we have a bunch of cells now. Now, it's not really easy to discern between one cell and another because there's no padding. So what you could actually do in your function that creates the section layout, we'll actually do it right now, between each of the groups, you could add some padding. You could also add some padding between the item. So let's do the item and see what that looks like. I believe they are called content insets, and these are NS directional edge insets. So NS directional edge in sets. So we're going to go with, I think they're the same actually. We'll go with this one. And they have top, leading, bottom, and trailing. So we're going to say perhaps one on each. So let me go with two actually, so we can probably see it better. Let's go with two. Go ahead and give this guy a run. You'll see a 2-point margin between each of the cells. So you can see that this collection view actually looks a lot more like a table view. And that's the power of these compositional layouts. And one other bug you might observe here is that the title is not scrolling with the collection view. And that's because we did an add sub view of the spinner before we configured the collection view. So the order matters. You need to add the collection view as the first subview to get this header up here to scroll with the scroll inset of the collection view. So what we will probably want to do is have a section up here at the top for featured. Let's see where that function went. For probably at the top for new releases maybe, and then featured playlists right below that. And then below that we'll have recommended. So let me change the order just like that. And each of those will have their own section layout. So for new releases, let's go ahead and create that layout. So what I want to do is new releases are albums. So we're going to have a horizontally scrolling section. And we're going to have 3 rows, very similar to how the iTunes app works on your device. So let's go back to that function where we create the layouts. And instead of it being a vertical layout, I'm going to go ahead and say this is horizontal. And what we will also say on this section, I'm going to say section.orthogonal scrolling behavior. And we're going to say this is continuous. It's kind of a fancy, funny word from geometry, but it basically lets your scroll view for this collection view scroll horizontally. So it's a little interesting. But right now we have this going horizontally and we only have one item at a time, and we probably want more than one item. So what we are going to do is we're going to say that this is a horizontal group, and we have one item in there such as that, and this is one item declaration. So let's go ahead and make this 3. Let's see what happens. I believe each group will be next to each other. So these are 3 groups or 3 items horizontally like this. So what we want is we want a vertical group inside of a horizontal group. So it's a little weird to think about in the beginning. So let's go ahead and do this. Let me just implement it. So maybe that'll help you guys better realize what the picture is mentally. So we're going to create a vertical group as well as a horizontal group. Now in the vertical group, we're going to have 3 elements, right? And they're going to be stacked vertically, which is our item. And then in our horizontal group, we're going to have the vertical group with 1 of these guys. And we want to make sure we change the name everywhere. We also used it down here. Go ahead and give that a run. I don't think we should have any issues, but we should see a vertical group now with a height of 3. And we can horizontally scroll to the next page, which also has 3. Now the size of this whole thing is like obnoxiously wrong. So let's see what we need to do. So the item size is perfectly fine. The size of the vertical group is the one that's the problem. So what we're going to say here is the size of this is going to be 360, such that each of the vertically stacked items has a space of 120. So, all right, so that looks to be correct, but we also need to bump this one up as well to 360. Let's try that one more time. And now we should have these like that. So we would show the album cover here. We would have, the name and some more information about the album here. So that's looking pretty good. Now, one thing that I kind of like in other apps is the horizontal width of this shouldn't go all the way to the end, because you can't really see that there's, more content on the right of it to scroll. So let's think about how we can fix that. Each of these things that we're scrolling is a horizontal group. So what we might want to do is change the fractional width to be, let's say, 0.9. That way, on the right-hand side, it's going to bleed over 10% of the next group like that. And we can scroll to the next page such that, you can always see that there's more content. Now, you can also change the scrolling behavior via orthogonal scroll to be group paging. And what this will do is this will page each of the horizontal groups. So if I do this, you'll see it snaps to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And this is exactly what apps like the iTunes app and the App Store do to achieve their, their really cool scrolling effects. Now, we could make the size of this a little larger. So let me go ahead and let's say each one of these, instead of being 120, it's 130 tall. So we'll have a total of 390 rather, just like that. And let's go ahead and give this guy a run. And let's see if we have our section. So cool. So this will be for, what did I say the top one was? New releases? Yep, new releases. Next one, we want featured playlists. So featured playlists, instead of having, the artwork and the name, we might want to have, 3 columns again, but just the album cover, the name below it. But first and foremost, how the heck do we provide a different section layout here? Well, we want to go ahead and introduce an enum of the top of this file. And I'm going to go ahead and call this section type. And let's actually be more specific and call this browse section type. And there's going to be 3 sections, right? There's going to be new releases. There's going to be, what else? There is also going to be, the next one is playlists. Let's call it featured playlist. And the third one is going to be recommended, I believe. Let me just double check. Yep, recommended tracks. So we're going to say this is recommended tracks, just like that. So cool, looking pretty good. So what we can actually do is we can just infer that this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. The reason we're not using an integer and assigning a raw value, for some of you guys thinking out there, we're actually going to add associated values to this. If you don't know what that is, don't worry, we'll go through it together. But let's just take care of this section to start off with. So we are going to grab this whole thing. I'm going to say switch on the section, which is the parameter that we're getting in. We're going to say for position 1, do this whole thing. For position 2, do a different section. And I guess what we could do is for position 3, we want to do something as well. And lastly, for the default value, that's not what we want. Default value, we'll also pass back a, like a default section, which will be a much simpler section. It'll just be one vertical element. So let me get rid of that. I'm just going to call this a group. We'll have that. The item content size, let's drop the item into here. We're going to have one of these. This will just be a group like so, like that. Let's get rid of the orthogonal scroll. And we'll just drop in that. That's what's basically what's going to happen if we add a fourth section, but don't supply, an implementation. So let me go ahead and give this a run. We actually right now don't even say multiple sections in the collection view. So let's actually say for the number of sections, we are going to say return 3. And what I'm going to go ahead and do here is we are going to say if index path dot section is 0, we want a particular color, otherwise a different color. For the next section, otherwise another color. So I'm just doing these colors right now so you guys can see like this whole layout business because it's a little confusing in my experience with people. So I want to make sure that it's pretty clear for everybody before we actually go and create a bunch of custom cells, because then it gets even more confusing. So go ahead and hit Command R to give it a run. You'll see you have 3 sections now. This is obnoxiously tall. So let's see what's going on. So we have number of sections is 3. Number of items in row is 20 for a given section. Let's go ahead and call this like 5. And let's see what's going on. So we should be passing back different sections. So if it's, I don't think we changed these. So we're going to say if section 0, since sections are enumerated from 0, section 1, which is the second one, and section 2. We're going to go ahead and change those layouts. Let's try that one more time. You hit pause and run it again. Bear with me. Collection views are pretty cool once you get them working. So here is the first one, here is the second one, and here is the third one. So right now we haven't changed the layout of them, but we will be changing the layout momentarily. So the first one is good. We only have 5 rows that we specified, or 5 cells, which is why it always stops at 5. But let's do the second one. So the second one here is going to be the featured playlists. And I don't like that look for featured playlists. So what we will change is under case 1 here. We find where I was. For case 1 here, we are going to say this is also going to be horizontally scrolling. But instead of it being group paging, we're going to say this is continuous. And let's see, we also want it to be a vertical group in a horizontal. But this vertical group, each of these items, instead of it being fractional, we're going to say each one is, let's say, 250, an absolute size of 250 for each of these, just like that. Now this horizontal group is going to be perhaps, so fractional with 90, once again, we don't want that. We're going to say this horizontal group is going to be absolute 250 and absolute 250. Let me just go ahead and give that a run and let's see what that looks like. I have a feeling it's going to be totally wrong, but let's see what we get. So cool. So here's what we have so far for this. Now the sizes are definitely not correct for the items. And let's see why. So we are in the second section. We're creating an item that are fractional with 100, 100, right? One is 100%. We have content insets, and then we have a vertical group. So perhaps we don't even, we are going to need this, but let's go ahead and just make that one horizontal group. The size of this group is going to be, I guess, the group itself will be a fractional width of 1. But instead of these items being fractional widths, I guess these need to be absolute as well. And one thing that I hope you guys get out of these videos is I don't know exactly what I'm typing, and I'm kind of guessing along the way, such as you guys are, I'm sure, as well. So if you ever need to guess your way through your code, it's literally everyone who's doing that. So don't think you're the only one. So let's go ahead and give that a run. I think that's probably more of our issue. Yep, here we go. So we have much bigger cells now, but what the heck happened? These are enormous. Okay, So we have 250 by 250. That's the size of an item. Our horizontal group, the dimension of each of these groups. So this is fractional heights. That's not what we want. Let me try making these 250 as well. That should have been fractional width is what I meant. But I guess these will be absolute 250. So we should have squares. Yep, that's what I'm going for. We've got squares now. And each of these cells is going to have the album in it. And then underneath it will be, rather the cover for the playlist. And underneath it will be the name of the playlist. But I kind of wanted to have like 2 rows because 1 row isn't quite as many as I would like. So let me go ahead and add another vertical group back. So I'm going to copy this. And we are going to say here, this is a vertical group. We're going to have 2 items in this. We're going to change this to be vertical. Now in here, we're going to have 1 vertical group. And the vertical group's height is going to be 500 to accommodate 2 albums vertically stacked, or 2 playlists rather. So let's go ahead and do that. And something's not right. So let's see what's going on. We have a vertical group here, which makes sense. And we want 2 of them. And then we've got a horizontal group. And this one also needs a height of 50 or 500 to accommodate our vertical group inside of it. And much better. Okay, cool. So we have our, up here will be our new releases. Here we'll have our obnoxiously large playlists. They're kind of too big and I'm kind of annoyed by them. So let's bump the font size or the size down a little bit. Let's say 100 instead of 250, let's say 150. This will be double that, so 300, 150, 300. All right, give that a run. What's super cool about these layouts is you can, okay, that's definitely not right. You can actually tweak them to be kind of what you want on like iPad and stuff too. So if you have a different look and feel that you're going for, you can actually tweak it based on the device. And that was an environment thing that I was mentioning that we're not going to use, but here we go, much better. We would have all of our albums showing like that. And now I feel like they're too small. Feel free to forward the video if this is getting slightly meticulous, but it needs to be a particular size. So when we go ahead and design it, we're not fussing with this again. That should be good. If it's not, then so be it. Let's go ahead and give that a run. And these are much better. And at the bottom here, we have recommended, and I kind of want this to be a vertical group, so it's not horizontal again. So we're going to say item fractional width is 1. We're going to say fractional height. Instead of this, we're going to say this is an absolute height of, let's say, 70 for a given track. We can actually probably get away with like 60 also. Let's try 60 here instead. So it's a little more compact. And let's see, we don't want a vertical group. I mean, we do want a vertical group, but we don't need 2 groups. We're going to say this is a single group. It is going to be vertical, just like that. And it's going to have 1 item like that. And then we can pass this item, this group rather, into the section. The width will be fractional width of 100%. And the height here will be 60. And we can actually say fractional height here also and just give it 1.0 because what this will use is the relational height of the group that it's inside of. And let's see why it's yelling at me. It's because I think I have an extra parenthesis right there. Let's go ahead and get rid of that, give it a run. All right, so we should be in business. Let's see, orthogonal scroll needs to be removed for this section. All right, give that a run. And we should hopefully be in business now. Fingers crossed. All right, cool. So we have a bunch of rows. These are actually not very tall. Let me just bump up the height of them since that's not going to be big enough to see album artwork very well. Let's see, 80. And I'm probably going to cut this video at the end of creating all these sections. We might do 1 or 2 more things, but here we go. Here is our layout that we're going to be working with. We're going to have our new releases up here. We might add section titles as well. But the other thing that I wanted to call out is we are going to need custom cells for each of these. So let's go ahead and just stub those files out under views. I am going to create a folder, and this is going to be called Browse. And let's go ahead and create 3 CollectionView cell subclasses. So this will be a subclass of a UI CollectionView cell. And this first one is going to be a new release CollectionView cell. Go ahead and create it, drop it in just like that. I like to also add in this static let identifier since we'll be using this later on. Let's go and create two more. Next one is going to be a featured playlist collection view cell. All right, go ahead and create it. I know this video has gotten a little verbose of me rambling, so I apologize, but almost there. All right, identifier. There's that identifier. Let's go ahead and create our third one here. We're going to create this, and this one is going to be recommended track collection view cell. Let's go ahead and create it. Boom, boom, done and done. Add our static identifier. All right. And in the next video, I guess we'll create these cells and we'll plumb our data through. So we haven't actually set up, maybe we'll do it, I guess, right now really fast, the data part. So we haven't actually set up calling all the different APIs in the fetch data. Well, first what we're going to do is actually, let me move this function, which creates our section layouts to the bottom, since it's a little large. So I'm going to move it into the extension here. We can drop the private on it, not really necessary. Go ahead and hit Command B to make sure you are still compiling successfully. But in this fetch data, what we want to actually do is fetch the data as an aggregate. And once all the data has fetched and been returned, then we are going to update our collection view. So let's actually do that in the next video because I don't want to go through it too quickly. I want to explain all the pieces. So if you haven't liked the video already, make sure to like it before you click away, subscribe to the channel, leave any comments, especially if you're confused about this whole mess down here. I tried to be pretty meticulous about it, but it got a little messy. So that's all for this one. I'll see you in the next part.